Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for a new Film Fanatic show. It is 10:17. Happy Monday. Hope everyone has had a pretty cool weekend. I had a pretty nice relaxing weekend. Pretty cool, and I had a big rehearsal yesterday for this project I've been talking about that we're going to start recording the next couple. I think we're going to start recording the week after next, in the next couple of weeks, so that'd be fun. And it's a all original project, so pretty cool. Haven't really There hasn't been like, I guess for what it is, like a formal announcement, but very cool. It's music that's composed by a filmmaker that I met last about 2 years ago. So we she has composed all of this music for this interesting project. So it definitely has a very David Lynch kind of vibe, which I was like, okay, automatically into it. But anyway, so we had a nice rehearsal for that yesterday, pretty long. It was all day rehearsal, but it was our last big rehearsal for the project. So, and then we're going to start recording, see how things go in the next couple of weeks and what have you. So, um, otherwise, I watched actually like three movies yesterday. It was kind of crazy, pretty intense. I got home from I got home, left in the morning or early afternoon for the rehearsal, and we got done, and then went out, got some food, went to the supermarket, came home, made some food, and then fired up some movies. And so yeah, I'm here to talk about a movie that I had been hearing a lot about, and it came out, I believe, in 2025. As far as I know, I had heard about this movie, or actually, it says 2024. And that movie is I Saw the TV Glow. It was a pretty hyped up movie that A24 put out. And anyone who knows A24, a pretty massively. I mean, they're definitely still like an independent company, but they have gotten really big over the last handful of years. Kind of helping launching the careers of some great directors, and they've put out so many films. It's kind of wild. They really played a key role in the fantastic films of Robert Eggers, Ari Aster, Jordan Peele, and they've put out all kinds of mostly in the horror genre, but they have kind of branched out to a degree in other genres, but mostly in that kind of vicinity. The biggest news as of late that I saw, which I'm not really sure what to think. I think it could be a cool thing, and then I'm not. Part of me is, I don't know, a little bit worried, or part of me doesn't really care, I guess. But they acquired A24 just recently, and it just came out like a couple of days ago that they acquired the rights for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, and they announced that they're going to be doing a Texas Chainsaw Massacre television show, and then also a movie or movies after that. Kind of interesting, kind of weird. I don't know. I don't know what to think. I think I do. I mean, obviously, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre uh, franchise, or I should say, especially the original, is such an iconic movie. It's one of my one of my most important films for me. One of my favorite horror movies of all time. One of the greatest horror films. One of the most influential. I absolutely love the second one, also directed by Toby Hooper. And I had a lot of mixed things, as far mixed reactions, or I should say, not good reactions to a lot of the other films in the franchise. There are quite a few other ones. When I first saw the prequel that came out a few years back, and then the remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre with Jessica Biel, I believe. I was not a fan of those movies, but a few years ago, it really switched for me. I bought those movies on DVD. I had seen them once or twice, and I really was not into those films. Up until that point, the first two, Texas, directed by Toby Hooper, have always been my favorites, and I really love. I can't describe how much I love those films, especially the first one. And what Toby Hooper did with Texas Two to really kind of change things up and really give it some new energy because it's essentially like a black comedy. But anyway, I did not like the remake that had come out with Jessica Biel. I thought it was okay. There were things about it I thought were okay, but and then also the prequel that came out after that, and I had seen both those films a couple times. They kind of grew on me slightly. It was kind of interesting, and then I ended up buying them really cheap. I got these really good versions of them on DVD for really cheap, and actually really good quality DVDs. And I bought them somewhere a couple of years ago, or not that long ago, and now I absolutely love those movies. I think those movies are super badass. It totally something clicked with me when I watched those two films later on, and in the most and just within the last few years. I really love those films. I think they're really true to the original kind of source material created by Toby Hooper. They're really dirty. They definitely have that grindhouse feel, which I love. They're really raw, nasty, and kept that dirty kind of essence that, especially the first ones, always had. And then they did some. I feel like they added some really interesting things to the story. So it was a great balance, and I really love those movies. The rest of the films in the franchise, there's I think there's like three or four other films in the franchise that I'm not really a big fan of. I also there was the last one that came out, I believe, was a Netflix version of Texas. I've never seen it. I heard a lot of mixed things about that, so it's pretty mixed for me. But I will say there's four movies in the franchise, especially the first two, that I really do love. So I guess you could say, or I guess I could say that I am as the franchise itself, which is a massive franchise. I've grown to like the other films more, but I'm not sold on a lot of them. So just recently, again, like Netflix, or I should say A24, bought the rights to this franchise, which is could be interesting, could be, I don't know. And I guess they also announced that their TV show is going to be made first or released first before the movies, which is kind of odd. So I don't know. So there's a lot of people out there that really love A24, and there's a lot of people that I know, they definitely have a big reputation with, like, showing and promoting and producing films that in the horror genre that are maybe well, definitely not cookie cutter films. I mean, when I start off the show with the incredible directors like Ari Aster and Robert Eggers and Jordan Peele, I mean, they're really, all three of those directors are incredibly unique, obviously very adventurous. They all have a really unique style. Each thing that they do really, I feel, stands out. Even if people might not like one or two or three of their films, they still have this very unique vision, And A24 really, I think, especially when they started out, and to a degree, I think they still do, but definitely was in the business of bringing unique voices to the horror genre. Taking some chances, not you know taking some risks, showing films that weren't, say, your typical horror film with your typical tropes that you would see. Like your paint by numbers kind of jump scare, formulaic kind of horror films, and but they also have this reputation of, for people who are kind of critics who don't necessarily like a lot of their films, you know, and I believe A24 even coined this phrase elevated horror, which is a little bit silly and sounds really pretentious, but kind of this newer way of showing and creating creating horror films that have this art house quality, if you will. And so, like, you hear the term a lot, elevated horror being thrown around a lot, and I believe they kind of created that, which is, I guess is kind of accurate. I mean, I just feel it's, whether a film has a kind of this European influence, or an American, or a film has a very American style. Typically a lot of European films have that kind of slow burn, slow pace aesthetic. Um, and since A24 has been around, they've been around for quite a few years, and they've really established themselves as this powerhouse. And they're still more or less like this independent, hub of filmmakers, they're A24 is still like an independent company for the most part, but they've grown so much over the years that they're almost kind of like this major studio. And there's been a lot of movies also that they have released that I feel are, I don't know, maybe a little bit too pretentious. Um, this case of style over substance, where it kind of moves away from where I think there are examples of films that they have put out that are not very good. I think over the years it's been, at least from my perspective, like there's been this weird gap where I think they have put out a handful of films of where they're okay, but they're not really. Certain films have not really been about storytelling anymore. It's been about these kinds of lofty metaphorical ideas, and they kind of get lost in the weeds, lost in the woods, where it becomes this thing of like style over substance. All the bells and whistles, but and a real big sense of pretentiousness and, to a degree, elitism. I don't know. And there has been that kind of feeling towards a lot of the later, releases by A24. And for me, it's like I kind of feel like I'm in the middle of that. I think has been a pretty big problem as of late with certain A24 films that have come out, like showcasing a lot of films that aren't really about storytelling anymore. And it does go back and forth, I think. But I do think, as a company, what they do, I love that they take risks. I love that they'll take risks with, relatively unknown um, directors that have an interesting vision. They have propelled and really brought some incredible directors to the world of cinema. Those examples that I mentioned before. But so I had heard about this movie. I saw the TV glow quite a bit, and I heard that this was. Some people had said, I remember seeing a few reviews for this movie about a year ago, um, where there were a few people saying that this was like, just an incredible movie, and it was really original and kind of this very new vision for like contemporary horror films, and lots of great praise. And so I had kind of forgotten about this movie only because I had heard all this hype about this movie about a year ago, and then it was, I think it just came out. It's been out for, or actually, what did I say? 2 years ago, 2024, which is crazy. Yeah, 2024. So it was. So I had heard about it in 2024 quite a bit. A lot of buzz around the movie, and that was this really unique kind of indie A24 film. And then had kind of forgotten about it, and it was out. It did get like a small but pretty significant theatrical release. I do remember being in theaters, but not for a very long time. And then I think it kind of left theaters, and then I think just recently it got a physical media release because I was at Opera House Video, of course, the great Opera House Video, the only video store in Maine. And for me, I typically watch old. I typically watch lots of old horror films, and most of the shows I've been doing have been films from the 70s and 80s. That's my jam, and I've always done. That's always been a thing for me, and I've just gotten more and more into those decades. Um, but that being said, I always try to stay, you know, in this kind of contemporary place. Like I love to see new movies a lot. I like to try to stay up on what's coming out, you know. And again, I've like the last 2 years, especially, well, really since 2024, but especially 2025, I saw a lot of movies in the theater, and which has been great. And then when I go to Opera House Video, typically what I do is I usually only get new releases. So I like to think I stay up to speed as far as new films that come out, especially in the horror genre. But again, I watch all kinds of genres, all kinds of styles. But that's my natural kind of what I'm naturally drawn to. So I try to, stay, keep my finger on the pulse of new films that are coming out, because I do. I mean, I just had a big thing recently where, which always astounds me. Um, and I kind of don't get it. It's just very, it's really strange to me. But maybe I take it too seriously. I don't know. But recently, in regards to talking about new movies, I'm talking about this movie I saw, the TV Glow, and I'm going to get uh, a lot deeper into it, and it's all related. But there's a YouTube person that I watch. I don't really watch her that much, but occasionally. Her name is Snarky J. She has a YouTube channel that's been around for a few years, quite a while, and she mostly like reviewed. When I first came across her channel, she was mostly talking about Marvel movies, mostly reviewing Marvel movies and DC movies, but it was all like comic book based films. She's also really into like the whole cosplay thing and all that stuff, which is cool. But she does do reviews for other films. I've noticed over the last couple of years she's kind of given, maybe brought a little bit more variety to her channel, and has reviewed other films that are not, in in the Marvel universe per se all the time. But she had just done a show, and she's done it quite a bit. And she's a huge, huge person in the YouTube. She's got a lot of the YouTube people that I watch, there's probably about 3 to 5 of YouTube folks that I watch pretty regularly. Um, you know, Mood 616 is one of my all-time favorites. He is a Canadian YouTube guy, and he specializes mainly in horror and exploitation movies. And then 42nd Street Forever is another guy that I think is probably my favorite. He's really, really awesome. He specializes in pure sleazy exploitation movies. But I also watch, people like Chris Stuckman, Cody Leach a little bit, and there's a few others. Breakfast All Day is another YouTube channel that I like. They review pretty big variety of channels, and they give some really smart reviews, and I like their personalities. Video Dave is another guy I just got into recently, who's really great. He does a lot of Criterion films, so there's a lot of different shit. But Snarky J's someone I watch every now and then, but she has done videos in the past of where she's out of the YouTube people that I watch. She's very young. She's a kid. She's in her early 20s, but she's okay. And she does watch a lot of films, and she does pretty extensive reviews on what she watches. But out of the YouTube people, folks that I watch, she's one of the biggest. I mean, you could definitely call her an influencer. Like, she has a massive crowd, a massive audience. Thousands and thousands of people. So she definitely has a massive audience and is definitely an influencer. I mean, she will. I think with her position, she could, really determine for people who follow her, kind of their habits. Whether their butts are going to go to a theater, go to see a film, or just stay home and stream it. I mean, and she can influence a mass amount of people, to either do to do those things. So it is significant. But she's made a couple of videos of where she really, tears the whole, going to the theater experience and all this stuff, kind of shits on it and tears it a new asshole, and basically, really ushers in this whole thing of, basically don't go to the theater, and just complaining and bitching and moaning about why people more or less shouldn't go to the theater. And it's kind of rough. And she did a video recently where she talked about a bunch of movies, or basically saying that all the movies that are coming out within this year and last year and even the year before, or basically all of the movies are just crap. And the reason that people are not going to the theater is because every movie company, every director thinks that people are idiots, and that they just want regurgitated films, remakes of films, reimagining of films, prequels, established IPs that have been around forever, franchises that have been forever, just the same, cut and paste kind of thing over and over again, and that the film industry itself just thinks that people are all idiots, and so they just regurgitate the same shitty ideas over and over again. And it's like, I do think, and then she also says that people generally can't have no attention span, and that most people that go to the theater now can't stay off their phones for more than 2 minutes. And it's like, and there's parts of it I definitely agree with what she's saying, but I do feel, and the main thing that irked me was her saying how there's so many bad movies, and I don't generally engage with people that way online, but I felt inclined to do it, so I was like, okay, that's great. You're your opinion is important, and I value your opinion and what have you. But here's a list of films, and I did this post. I don't know, maybe 3 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I said that's cool. Like that's your opinion, and but I basically said I completely disagree with what you're saying. Here's a list of about 9 to 10 films that I can just run off the top of my head that I thought were just fantastic films, um, all kinds of different genres, total variety of films, and movies that came out mainly in 2025 and also 2024, and I think one or two that came out this year. And I just I didn't have a plan or a list, and I just listed off movies that I've seen. Some movies I've seen multiple times in the theater, and I just like made a list. And I'm like, okay, well, if you're gonna just say all of these, everything that's coming out is just dog shit. Have you seen any of these movies? Like, and there's literally something for everyone, whether you're into a melodrama or an action movie or a horror film, whatever it is. Like, there's so much variety within this informal list I made, and I'm like, so what's up with that? Have you seen any of these movies? And also, when she had posted this video, there were hundreds and hundreds of comments from her followers saying the exact same thing, just basically taking a big dump on all the films that have been released within the last year or two. And the other thing is too is like all of these people, including her, taking this big dump on films in general, new releases, um, and they not once in any of these things that they're saying do they give an example of a movie that they did not like. And I was like, well, okay, you could at least give an example of something you felt was not very good, but that didn't happen. And so I posted this little list. I tried to keep it respect. I didn't want to be come across as a nasty, angry person. But I posted this whole big thing, and where I like named specific movies. Some movies I actually saw in the theater, and not one response from anyone. And there's like hundreds of people. Not even. And it would have been fine if people were like, "Well, you're full of shit. You don't know what you're talking about." Like that's fine. But it's just the fact that like nobody responded to any of these movies that I listed as examples of really great films. I don't get it. Like I don't know what the hell this is, a forum or a channel, a space to talk about film and to like debate something when you're making these really bold claims, and you're also a big influencer that will keep people from going to the theater or propel people to go to the theater or to stay home and just sit on their ass and watch a streaming movie. Like you're you're an influencer. You are somebody that can change to a degree how things are, and that is really unresponsible. She can do it and say what she wants, but it's all kind of bullshit. And I'm like, I was just amazed that there were there were zero responses from anything. And I'm like, what is this? Do people even care about films? Like, can you even have a discussion with any of these people? And part of me is like, are all of these people literally just idiots because they just want to jump on this like you know uh, bandwagon that just throws shit out and throws shit around and just kind of wants to like propel this like chaotic um, negative thing that our society loves so much. I don't know. It's very weird. It's very weird. But anyway, getting back to this movie, I saw the TV Glow. So I did watch. I got this at Opera House Video last night, or actually no, when did I get it? I got it on Saturday at Opera House Video, and I had heard a lot about this movie, forgot about it, and then I was in Opera House Video. And then I saw it, and I was like, oh wait, yes, that is a movie I heard about a lot, so I wanted to see it, and they had it on Blu-ray, which was cool. So I sat down, what was it, last night, and I watched it, and I did not make it all the way through this movie. I felt like this movie was um, one of the most pretentious movies I have seen in a long time. A pure example, 101. A pure example of style over substance. This movie was really, really disappointing. I had heard so much about this movie, and I've looked up reviews for this movie. Typically, I don't look up reviews, with a lot of the YouTube people that I listen to, or even looking up reviews online, um, from, different publications. I typically don't do that until after I see a film, especially if it's in the theater. Sometimes I will, but generally I don't. Generally I don't. And so I looked up some reviews after, actually this morning, for this film, and I was kind of dumbfounded by the amount of praise that this movie continues to get. Because I remember when I heard about this movie a couple of years ago, or a year ago, because we just got into 2026. Um, that's what I heard. I heard all this praise that this movie was this really unique, like another new unique vision to horror that was being introduced to the world from A24, and it was a real, um, just had this really kind of groundbreaking thing about it. And I really feel like this movie is really the case of style over substance. There is like, I will say visually, this film, there are there are things about the movie, the camera angles, the colors. There is a lot of metaphor in this film. I thought it was very interesting. Um, Essentially, this movie is about uh, a kid coming to terms that they are, they were technically born a male, and they want to transition to a female. And it's about, and vice versa. It's about transgender issues. Real issues that kids and people face, um, and dealing with that coming of age story, which is in this world is incredibly hard and frightening. And that will to be yourself and acceptance. That's essentially what this film is about. So there's a lot of metaphor around um, you know all of these things. But other than that, I thought the dialogue, um, the pacing of this movie, total Snoresville. I thought this movie was so incredibly boring, and I felt this movie was so um, just so uber pretentious. Like again, this thing had like A24 has this reputation of like making these really kind of people who don't like A24 films, and there's like this kind of stereotype around A24 films of where they just make these kind of uber pretentious kind of art house films, that are really heavy handed, and they're gonna like deliver these social issues at you like it's a missile coming at your head. And this film totally exemplifies everything, like all of those negative kinds of things or connotations that A24 gets of that. It makes these really uber pretentious, um, art house horror films, and that they get lost in the weeds. The films get kind of lost up their own ass. because they have all of these lofty goals, but when it comes down to just the art of telling a good story, they fail pretty miserably, and almost utterly in every way. There is that fraction of people that look at A24 as that, and I have seen films that I feel in the A24 family that definitely fit that description. But I think there has been some really great films. I've kind of been in the middle of that. But so there is this big, giant, glaring stereotype around A24. And again, every stereotype, there's always, whatever it is, there's always some kind of kernel of truth behind it. But unfortunately, I feel like I saw, um, I saw the TV Glow completely is the epitome of that stereotype in every conceivable way that you can imagine. Like it's almost as if like if I think of a A24 film that I think is really good, like say some of the films by Jordan Peele or Robert Eggers or like Hereditary, where I think these are just really great films. And again, these are all just my opinion or whatever, but I feel like I could name a film by Robert Eggers or Ari Aster or Jordan Peele, who I love those guys to death, and I can pick one of their movies and say, well, yeah, these movies are really unique. They're really interesting. They have all of these guys have such a unique voice, and they're doing something new and propelling every genre, whatever it is, but especially my favorite genre. There's always got to be something, a director or a film that comes along, and to kind of keep the genre alive and kicking, there's always got to be something, a new voice that comes along that kind of propels it and does something new and pushes it along, and to make it grow and to give it lasting power. I mean, you can have films that constantly, replicate ideas that have been around. I think, examples like for that would be, my favorite genre is the slasher genre. And I think a lot of the times, like there's a template. There's a template for the slasher genre, right? That most films follow. Where you have a group of teenagers or young people that are in this isolated area, like a cabin or a lake or in a spooky house. And then there's this killer, a mass killer who picks them all off one by one. There's the big reveal. There's a lot of, kind of shocking kills. And then there's like gratuitous sex scenes. Those are the things you typically see and expect in a slasher film. And, but I think too often, even within that, but there's a template. There's obviously a template. But I think too often when it comes to slasher films, people that don't like slasher films say, well, they're all kind of the same. And there is a template. There is a thing, tropes that work in the genre. And as a slasher fan, that I kind of expect to see. And I want to see, because it's that those are those satisfying qualities, and that give it that slasher label. And then but I also feel that people who don't like slasher films will not recognize that some of the films are really unique and have something bring and there is a variety. Movies like Madman or Sleepaway Camp or Nightmare. There's so many films. The Burning that use that template, but I feel like they all have something. They're doing something new and unique. But there is a template, and they do use those tropes that help, I guess, do make it into this thing of where it qualifies then as a slasher film. But then, and every now and then, I think there has to be a film in any genre, whether it's a western or science fiction or whatever, and any of those respective genres, like there is a massive amount of films in those genres. Science fiction, horror, um, it could be anything, film noir or whatever it is. Um, but there's always a time and place where I feel like there needs to be a film that comes along or a director that comes along that kind of mixes things up, and pushes things along. And I think in the slasher genre, In a Violent Nature was one of those movies that did do something different and did kind of something push push the genre into this newer realm, and really did give something new to the genre that we quite haven't seen before. And I think A24, Robert Eggers, Ari Aster, those guys have all done that in the horror genre, where they have integrated other things that we haven't necessarily seen in horror films and what have you. But and on the other spectrum of things, A24 does have this reputation of making these really uber pretentious, head up your ass art house films for the sake of just being artsy, and this real pretentious thing of style over substance, where there isn't really a story. Because at the end of the day, filmmaking, going to see films, watching films, it's about the sharing of ideas, and it's about a story, and feeling that chemistry between being the audience and those actors, and caring about what you're seeing. It's not, creating a movie is super hard, but that general connection, or what you're seeking for, or looking for, is not rocket science. And I feel like, unfortunately, this movie is an example of all of the incredibly bad, but to a degree true stereotypes that A24 is all about. Making these really grandiose films with lofty ideas, but they get so lost in this ocean of pretentiousness that it's not really storytelling anymore, and it's not about the story. Because I felt like, again, this movie was purely style over substance. I thought this movie, I got about, it's an hour and 40 minutes. Um, and I swear I got maybe, I definitely got, I watched it for about an hour, maybe a little bit more. But I did give it, again, I try to give movies a chance. Like, I'll pretty much watch anything. I don't have a hang up. Certain movies, certain things, you might have to be, if you want to watch, like, say, a Lars von Trier film and, like, watch The Antichrist, you might have to be in, like, a certain kind of fucking framework to watch that, because it's so fucking, like, gross and vile and brutal. But generally, there's certain things you have to, you might be have to be in a certain mindset. But generally, for me, I'll watch anything. I'll check out anything. I like to think one of the qualities that I have that are good, I guess, is that I'm pretty open to giving things a chance. Even if, like, I'm starting to say listen to it, if it's a case of a record or an album or a movie, and you know I'm really, like, kind of not in get it's not connecting for me, and I'm like, oh, for me it's even harder if I go to the movies, because you pay the ticket, you drove to the theater, you're there with maybe a group of friends or what have you, so you've invested the time, the investment, and then you're sitting in the theater and you're like, fuck, I can't get into this, like, what's going on here. That's a lot harder, because there have been circumstances, which I haven't done in a while, but where I have gone to see a movie and it was really awful, and I wanted to, like, walk out. So it's different when you're home watching a movie, because then you can kind of just maybe take a break, throw something else in, or just shut it off. But generally, if I'm home watching a movie and I'm not into the movie, and I give it like an hour, at least an hour, which I think is relatively fair. Sometimes more. Occasionally, it will happen if I watch a movie and I really am not digging it at all. It might be less than an hour, but generally, I give it around that space. Um, I remember seeing an interview with Quentin Tarantino where he talked about he has this thing of when he watches new films for the first time, he'll give it 45 minutes to an hour, and if it's not connecting with him, he'll take it out, you know. So, but for me, it's kind of that way, and I gave this movie a good try. I watched it, and I was really excited about watching this movie. I think I was pretty fresh. I'd taken a little nap, I had a little coffee. You know, I was ready to go. And I got about, I'd say maybe an hour and 10 minutes into it, and I was like, this movie um, is like, I felt story wise and the characters and the acting. I was like, this is as exciting as watching paint dry. That's exactly what's happening now. Yeah, on one hand, there were things about this movie. I thought some of the music was kind of interesting. It has the way the movie starts visually is pretty beautiful. I think there is some real, from a technical standpoint, there are some real interesting things. Um, Really beautiful like color palette. There's some really interesting camera work. A lot of like long panning shots. The director is Jane Shorebrown, and I guess she has directed other films, one or two other films that I haven't definitely have not seen that I heard were kind of similar to this movie. It stars Justin Smith and Jack Haven, and Ian uh, Foreman, and the cast mainly it's comprised of mainly Justin Smith and Jack Haven, who are good actors, but I felt like it was such a dry ass movie, and it was so slow, and it felt like the movie doesn't really go anywhere. It feels like again, I love slow paced films. I watch a lot of movies that are very slower. People who have less of a tolerance for slower films would probably find them boring. But I feel like even movies that move somewhat to a snail's pace, you're still getting information that is intriguing. And it's kind of like slowly pulling you in. It's that slow burn. And you're getting these little snacks, and you're getting pulled in slowly. And there's like, and then other films that are not, say, uh, a pure slow burn experience. There's this chemistry. Like right away you're introduced to these characters. They all have this life about them. They all have something that is interesting, even if whether you know a lot about who they are or their backstory, or they don't. There's just they present these really interesting colors and hues, and there's a chemistry. There's whether it's a character that you think is really likable, or it's, say, a real villainous character who is, kind of this monstrous character, but there's still this quality of where you have empathy and you kind of care about what the hell is going to happen to this character or characters. There's like a chemistry, and there's an engagement of, and there's a dynamic to the cast. Again, I made it through about an hour and 15 minutes. No, I would say a little less than that. And then I took the movie out because I just it was driving me crazy and I could not get into it. And then immediately I put in another movie which I'm really excited about reviewing, called The Honeymoon Killers. Amazing film, but the other thing, watching the Honeymoon Killers, right after, I was like immediately drawn to the characters. I was like, I thought every character had their own personality. There's something interesting that they're about. There's a chemistry. There's a dynamic to what's going on. It's an engaging story. Just right away, I'm drawn into it. With this, it was a very slow burn, and then it just felt like it just got slower. And the movie doesn't really work towards anything. I've seen a couple of reviews for this film of where it was talked about in this one review in a, in a pun intended, in a good light. Um, but they said that ultimately the film doesn't really arrive anywhere. It's just kind of the same thing about these two characters, these two teenage kids that are struggling with their identity, gender identity, and they feel incredibly, isolated from the world. They're both drawn to this television show that they're fascinated with and obsessed with, and they lose themselves in that. And there's this bond with that, but then they feel like they're the lines of like reality for them, or at least what they perceive to be reality, with what they're seeing in this television show and their everyday lives is totally blurred. And they increasingly get more and more isolated. Um, they don't feel like they are connected to anything. Essentially they're dead inside. And it's a very bleak film, and it's a very dark film. There's a lot of metaphor, and there's a lot of things like that I identify with, especially being a teenager, let alone being a gay teenager. Even in this day and age, where there is more acceptance, but there, I don't think that there is to a degree either. Um, that makes it even harder. And being a teenager is can be a horrifying experience and incredibly isolating. So topple, dealing with gay and gender issues and realizing that you are very different than your friend across the street, coming to terms with that when you are definitely in this kind of minority space and you just don't fit in. Like, that's a lot to deal with. And you live in this world or community that um, judges everything and has to, and create this like scapegoat, or has these um, horrible things that they have to blame for their feeling of inadequacy, their feelings of self-loathing. They have to blame other groups and vilify something that's not that's different than them. So I get that, but when it comes down to it, there was no. I felt it. This film was so incredibly slow. I felt it was boring. I felt like there was the writing for this film did not go anywhere. Total flatline. I did not. I don't understand the praise that some of these. And again, I'm not like just trying to disrespect anyone. But I was a little bit shocked because of how much acclaim this film's gotten. A lot of acclaim, and especially the actors and the performances. And I just don't get it. Like, because I felt like there was zero chemistry. There was no dynamic. It was all really monotone. It went from quiet to quieter. I felt the entire thing. It never worked towards anything. There was no surprises. Um, you basically see it's the same kind of tone and the same kind of delivery that you experience in the first 5 minutes. That you experience the same thing throughout the entire film. Wicked boring, and I felt that this film, again, it's all bells and whistles. I think visually there's some really cool things that are happening and that you do see. Some of the music was kind of interesting, But I think ultimately this movie suffers from being way too pretentious and crawls up its own ass and does not come out of its own ass, unfortunately. So, yeah, I take a hard pass on this movie. I kept wishing that some of the characters on the screen would like, man, can somebody give them a cup of fucking coffee? Whew, wow. But anyway, it's an unfortunate thing that A24, it's stereotype, but this exemplifies those negative stereotypes that A24 gets. So take a hard pass on this movie. Anyway, thanks again. Peace.